Put her at the kids' table, right next to the high chairs. My grandmother's voice sliced through the glass-paneled dining room of the Blackwood estate, sharp enough to freeze 55 distinguished guests in mid-bite. Before I could even swallow the lump of shame in my throat, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder, not to drag me away, but to anchor me in place. Sergeant Major Marcus Vance, standing 6'4" in his pristine army dress blues, stared down the matriarch of the Blackwood family with a look that could stop a tank. "If Evelyn sits at the kids' table, Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice quiet enough to force the entire room into total silence, "then I'll be sitting right beside her. And I think the city prosecutor, the chief of police, and your legal counsel sitting at table 1 might be very interested to learn why the actual owner of this house isn't allowed at her own dinner." If you want to experience stories where the hidden truth always demands a reckoning, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened over the next 48 hours changed everything I thought I knew about my life. The silver butter knife in my right hand was so cold it felt wet. 2 minutes earlier, I had been standing in the grand foyer of Blackwood Manor in Oak Ridge, Virginia, holding an antique velvet box containing my late father's posthumous Distinguished Service Cross. My father, Captain Daniel Vance, had died 8 months ago in a classified training exercise in Fort Liberty. At least, that was the official casualty report sent to my mother and me. "Evelyn, move your things to the sunroom," my Aunt Clara hissed, stepping into my personal space and reeking of expensive French perfume and anxiety. She snatched the velvet box out of my fingers before I could react, tucking it inside her leather clutch with a swiftness that felt practiced. "This dinner is for serious donors supporting your cousin Julian's judicial campaign. You look like a charity case in that dress, and quite frankly, your presence makes the family uncomfortable after what Daniel did." "What Daniel did?" I whispered, my vision spotty with sudden heat. "My father gave 22 years to the airborne. He died serving this country." "He died under investigation for selling military surplus tech to civilian contractors, Evelyn," my grandmother interjected, stepping down from the raised dais in the center of the dining hall. Her diamond knuckles clicked against her crystal champagne flute. "Your father ruined our name before he went into the dirt. The only reason you're allowed on this property is out of family obligation. Now take your purse, sit at the folding table by the kitchen doors, and don't speak unless spoken to." I turned to my mother, Sarah, expecting her to burn the room down with her anger. But she didn't even look at me. She sat at table 1, staring blankly into her water glass, her hands trembling so violently that her gold wedding band clinked rhythmically against the rim. She knew they were going to do this, and she hadn't said a word on the drive over. That's when Sergeant Major Marcus Vance, my father's former executive officer, and a man I hadn't seen since the funeral, stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains near the mahogany staircase. He wasn't supposed to be there. The family had explicitly excluded military personnel from the gala to keep the focus on Julian's political launch. When Marcus threatened to expose the truth to the city prosecutor, Eleanor didn't flinch. She smiled, a razor-thin, aristocratic smile, and gestured toward the security detail near the archway. "Sergeant Major, you are a guest in my home. If you create a scene, I will have you removed for trespassing, and I will ensure the VA re-evaluates your retirement pension by morning." "You could try, Eleanor," Marcus replied softly, pulling a thick, wax-sealed manila envelope from the inner pocket of his dress uniform coat. He didn't open it, he simply set it on the white linen tablecloth right next to Eleanor's plate. "But before you call security, you might want to open paragraph 4 of your late husband's land trust agreement, the one executed in 1998, 6 months before Daniel deployed to Iraq." Eleanor's posture stiffened instantly. The color didn't leave her face. It drained so fast, her skin looked like translucent parchment. Aunt Clara reached for the envelope, but Eleanor slammed her ringed hand down on Clara's wrist, stopping her mid-air. "Where did you get this?" Eleanor demanded, her voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. Daniel left it in a secure locker at Fort Liberty with instructions that it be delivered to Evelyn on her 25th birthday, which happens to be today. My mind spun into complete vertigo. My 25th birthday wasn't today. My birthday was in November, 3 months away. Why would my father give Marcus a legal document with a deliberate error about my age? Unless the document wasn't meant for me at all, or unless the date wasn't a mistake, but a code. Before I could ask, my cousin Julian stood up from table 1, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with deliberate slowness. Julian was 32, sleek, handsome, and running for district court judge on a platform of law, order, and family legacy. Marcus, this is a private family event. If my uncle left legal papers, they belong in probate court, not on a dinner table in front of 50 donors. Give me the envelope. Julian reached for the wax-sealed folder. Marcus didn't block him. Instead, Marcus pulled a small brass desk key from his pocket, an old-fashioned 3-digit serial number stamped into the tip, 408. He slid it across the table until it knocked against Julian's glass of sparkling wine. When Julian saw the number 408, his hand stopped inches from the envelope. His knuckles turned white. He looked from the key to Marcus, then to my mother, who was still staring silently into her glass. "That key doesn't belong to Fort Liberty," Julian breathed, his voice cracking slightly. That's from the safe deposit box at Oak Ridge National Bank, the one my father closed 5 years ago." "Your father didn't close it, Julian," Marcus said smoothly. "He transferred ownership to Daniel, and Daniel changed the access phrase 3 days before his accident." The air in the room grew suffocating. 55 guests were watching us now, pretending to cut their prime rib while hanging on every single whispered word. "Evelyn," Marcus said, turning to me and ignoring the rest of the table completely. "Your mother's car is outside. We need to leave now. There is something in the trunk you need to see before the local police arrive." "Police?" Aunt Clara shrieked, forgetting her composure. "Why are the police coming here?" "Because," Marcus said, pulling his phone from his pocket and tapping the screen once to reveal an active location tracker showing 3 squad cars moving down the long driveway toward Blackwood Manor. "I called them 20 minutes ago to report a stolen military device. Serial number matched the one found in Julian's campaign office this afternoon." Julian's face collapsed into absolute terror. But instead of running, he looked directly at my mother. "Sarah, tell him. Tell her why we did it. Tell him before he ruins everything." My mother finally raised her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot, and filled with a cold, terrifying detachment I had never seen in her before. "I told you to leave Daniel alone, Julian," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "I told you if you pushed him, he would leave the paper trail." "What paper trail?" I shouted, my restraint finally snapping. "What did you do to Dad?" My mother didn't answer me. She reached into her purse, pulled out a second brass key, identical to the one Marcus had set on the table, and dropped it into my lap. "The trunk of my car isn't locked, Evelyn. Go look, but don't come back inside once you do." I didn't wait. I ran down the polished marble corridor, out the grand double doors, and into the freezing Virginia rain. My mother's dark blue sedan was parked near the fountain. I grabbed the latch of the trunk and pulled it up. Inside, resting on a blue moving blanket, was not a stolen military device or a stack of money. It was an olive-drab tactical hard case covered in fresh mud, with my father's name stenciled across the front in faded white spray paint, Captain D. Vance, 3SGO. Beside it lay an old, rain-slicked leather journal. I grabbed the journal and flipped to the last entry, dated 4 days before my father's reported death. The handwriting was shaky, written in blue ballpoint pen. "If Sarah gives Evelyn the second key, it means Eleanor has finally executed the land sale. They think I died in the rollover at Fort Liberty. They don't know Marcus pulled me out before the engine caught fire. Evelyn, if you are reading this, do not trust Marcus. He isn't working for the army. He's working for Julian." My breath
hitched in my chest. The rain hit the paper, smudging the blue ink. I slowly turned around. Marcus was standing 6 feet away from me in the downpour. He wasn't looking at the squad cars pulling into the driveway with their blue lights flashing against the oak trees. He was looking at the leather journal in my hands. His hand was tucked inside his dress blues coat. "You told him not to trust me, didn't you?" My breath hitched in my chest. The rain hit the paper, smudging the blue ink. I slowly turned around. Marcus was standing 6 feet away from me in the downpour. He wasn't looking at the squad cars pulling into the driveway with their blue lights flashing against the oak trees. He was looking at the leather journal in my hands. His hand was tucked inside his dress blues coat. "You told him not to trust me, didn't you?"
That casket was empty, Evelyn, Marcus said softly. He didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small encrypted satellite phone and held it out toward me. "Your father is alive. He's been in a safe house in North Carolina for 8 months, but the man who put him there isn't your cousin Julian." The flashing police lights swept over Marcus's face. "Who put him there?" I screamed over the sound of the rain and the approaching sirens. "Your mother," Marcus said. "Sarah didn't hide the paper trail to protect Julian. She hid it to keep your father from finding out what she did with the land trust 25 years ago. You aren't a Blackwood, Evelyn, and Daniel Vance isn't your biological father." The world seemed to stop moving. The rain felt silent. The red and blue lights bouncing off the stone facade of Blackwood Manor felt fake, like a stage play set up to tear my sanity into pieces. "That's a lie," I breathed, shaking my head. "My dad loved me. He built my first bike. He taught me how to shoot. He sent me letters from every deployment." "He loves you more than his own life," Marcus agreed, his tone brutally steady. "That's why he spent the last 8 months pretending to be dead, so Julian and Eleanor wouldn't use his military security clearance to seize the 400 acres of timberland registered in your name, land that holds 3 million barrels of natural gas deposits." The squad cars screeched to a halt on the gravel behind Marcus. 4 armed sheriff deputies stepped out, weapons unholstered, training their flashlights on us. "Sergeant Major Marcus Vance," the lead deputy shouted over the loudspeaker. "Step away from the vehicle and place your hands on your head." Marcus didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on mine. "The key stamped 408 doesn't open a bank box, Evelyn. It opens the old ranger tower on the ridgeline behind this estate. Your father is sitting in that tower right now, watching us through a spotting scope. If you go back inside that house, Julian's lawyers will force you to sign the estate waiver before midnight. If you come with me, you lose your family name forever." I looked back toward the lit windows of Blackwood Manor. Inside, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, I could see my grandmother standing at the head of the table, calmly sipping her wine, while Julian spoke frantically into a cell phone. My mother was still sitting there, completely motionless, staring at her empty plate. Everything they had ever told me about my life, my father's service, my family's noble heritage, and my place at their table, was a hollow, calculated lie designed to keep me quiet until I turned 25 and the land trust auto-transferred to Eleanor. "Deputies, lower your weapons," a sharp, unfamiliar voice barked from the lead police vehicle. A tall woman in a dark trench coat stepped out from the passenger side, holding up a federal badge. "I'm Special Agent Miller, ARME CID. Sergeant Major Marcus Vance is operating under federal authority. Lower your weapons immediately." The local deputies slowly pointed their guns toward the ground, looking confused and nervous. Agent Miller walked past them, her heavy boots splashing through the mud, and stopped next to Marcus. "Is the file intact?" she asked Marcus, not even looking at me. "She has the journal," Marcus replied, "and the second key." Agent Miller turned to me.
her sharp blue eyes scanning my wet hair, my ruined dress, and the mud-cacked tactical case in the trunk. "Evelyn, 25 years ago, your mother made a deal with Eleanor Blackwood to conceal a fraud involving stolen military payroll funds. Your father discovered it during his last pre-deployment audit. When he confronted Eleanor, Julian staged the training vehicle accident at Fort Liberty to silence him. But Daniel survived." "If he survived," I demanded, wiping the freezing rain from my face, "why didn't he come to me? Why did he let me mourn him for 8 months?" "Because if Julian knew Daniel was alive, Julian's legal team would have declared Daniel mentally incompetent under military law, taking control of his power of attorney and, through him, your land trust. Daniel had to stay dead until the federal statute of limitations passed at midnight last night." My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. "So the dinner, the invitation, the kids' table, it was a trap," Marcus said quietly. "Eleanor invited you here tonight to publicly humiliate you, break your confidence, and make you feel so isolated that when Julian offered you a $50,000 settlement check to sign away your rights, you'd jump at it. They needed you to feel worthless." A terrible, icy calm washed over me. The confusion and hurt that had been choking me for months didn't disappear. It hardened into something dense and unbreakable.
I turned away from the police cars and looked at the silver key stamped 408 resting in my hand. Then I looked at the grand double doors of Blackwood Manor. "They think I'm weak," I said, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. "They think because my father isn't here to protect me, I'll bow down to them." "Evelyn, you don't need to go back in there," Marcus warned, reaching out a hand. "CID has enough to arrest Julian for fraud and federal conspiracy right now." "No," I said, stepping back from his reach. "If you arrest him out here in the driveway, Eleanor will hire 5 teams of appellate lawyers and spin this in the press as a tragic family misunderstanding. She'll blame everything on my mother, pay a fine, and keep her social standing." Agent Miller narrowed her eyes. "What are you proposing?" I replied, grabbing the olive drab tactical hard case out of the trunk and setting it heavy onto the hood of the car. "You said the land trust transferred to me at midnight last night, which means every inch of Blackwood Manor, the house, the land, the silver on that table, and the chair my grandmother is sitting in, belongs entirely to me." I popped the heavy metal latches on the tactical case. Inside, cushioned in custom dark foam, was a pristine leather-bound master ledger dating back to 1998, filled with original bank seals, wire transfer receipts, and handwritten signatures bearing Eleanor Blackwood's distinctive, elegant script. Glued to the inside lid was a photograph of my father in full dress uniform, standing beside a young Marcus, both of them smiling outside a small wooden cabin on the ridge. On the back of the photo, my father had written 3 words: "Truth builds fortresses." I pulled the ledger out, tucked it firmly under my arm, and started walking back toward the front doors of the mansion. "Evelyn," Marcus called, following 2 steps behind me, "what are you going to do?" "I'm going to take my seat at the table," I said, without looking back. I kicked open the heavy mahogany double doors of the dining hall. The heavy oak hit the brass stoppers with a sound like a gunshot, echoing off the high ceilings. The conversations at all 5 tables died instantly. 55 heads turned toward the doorway. My dress was soaked with rain and covered in mud at the hem. My hair was plastered to my forehead. But as I walked down the center aisle between the white-clothed tables, I didn't look at the guests. I looked straight at Eleanor Blackwood, who was standing at the head of table 1, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Aunt Clara gasped, clutching her pearls. "Evelyn, look at the state of you. Security, get this girl out of—"
Security works for the owner of the property, Aunt Clara, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the dead quiet of the room. I reached table 1 and slammed the leather-bound master ledger directly onto Eleanor's silver chargers, knocking over 2 crystal wine glasses. Deep red wine spilled across the crisp white tablecloth, soaking into Eleanor's handwritten place cards. Julian scrambled out of his chair, his face slick with sweat. Evelyn, you're out of your mind. You need to leave before I have you arrested for disturbing the peace. You can't arrest me for being on my own property, Julian. I leaned over the table until I was inches from my grandmother's face. Under the terms of the 1998 Blackwood Family Land Trust, which defaulted to full sole ownership upon my 25th birthday, this house, the surrounding 400 acres, and every asset attached to the Blackwood estate transferred unconditionally to me. Eleanor's hand trembled so violently, her champagne glass shattered against the edge of her plate, scattering shards of lead crystal across the ruined table. You don't know what you're talking about. That trust was nullified when your father died. My father isn't dead, Eleanor, I said quietly. The entire dining room collective sucked in its breath. My mother let out a jagged, sobbing gasp and buried her face in her hands. Julian staggered back against the sideboard, knocking a silver gravy boat onto the hardwood floor with a deafening clatter. He's alive, I continued, pointing toward the large bay windows overlooking the dark ridgeline outside. He's been watching every single move you made since the accident. He watched you try to steal his pension. He watched you try to frame him for Julian's military supply fraud. And he watched you call his daughter a charity case and order her to sit at the kids' table. 2 CID federal agents in dark suits stepped through the dining room doors, followed by Sergeant Major Marcus Vance. Agent Miller walked straight up to Julian, pulled a set of steel handcuffs from her belt, and snapped them around his wrists before he could even raise his hands to defend himself. Julian Blackwood, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and obstruction of justice. Agent Miller read in a cold, practiced monotone.
Mother, do something, Julian screamed as the agents pulled him backward toward the exit. Tell them it was your idea. Eleanor didn't look at him. She couldn't. She stared at the spilled red wine on the table, her mouth working silently as her grand political launch collapsed into a public recorded federal bust in front of the city's most powerful political donors. Aunt Clara grabbed her designer purse and tried to slip past Marcus toward the side doors, but Marcus stepped into her path, holding up a federal subpoena. Not so fast, Clara. The grand jury is going to want to know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, registered under your name. The 55 guests sat in frozen, horrified silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The prestigious donors, judges, and prosecutors Eleanor had spent 6 months cultivating were staring at her with utter disgust, slipping their phones out to record the breakdown. I turned to my mother, who was still weeping silently into her hands. "Mom," I said softly. She looked up at me, her face pale, ruined by years of fear and compliance. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. Eleanor told me if I didn't go along with it, they'd take everything from us. They'd ruin your father's memory." "You chose them over him," I said, the words hurting to speak, but necessary. "You chose their lies over his truth. You sat at this table and let them humiliate his daughter." I picked up my mother's purse, set it in her lap, and pointed toward the door. "You need to leave now. The estate car is outside. It will take you to a hotel." "Evelyn, please," she begged, reaching for my hand. I pulled my hand back. "Go, Mom." She stood up slowly, her head bowed in deep, permanent shame, and walked out of the room alone, her footsteps echoing down the long, empty marble hallway. Finally, I turned to Eleanor Blackwood. The matriarch of Oak Ridge society looked smaller now. Stripped of her money, her political influence, and her family's fear, she was just an arrogant, cruel old woman sitting in a chair that didn't belong to her. "The police are going to seize the house as evidence of the fraud scheme, Eleanor," I said calmly. "You have 30 minutes to pack one suitcase. Anything else left on this property tomorrow morning will be auctioned off, and the proceeds will be donated to the Veterans Legal Defense Fund." Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you've won, don't you? You're just like your father, arrogant, unyielding. You think you can stand alone in this world without us?" "I'm not alone," I said. The grand double doors opened once more. Walking down the hall, wearing a dark wool coat over a simple civilian suit, was a tall man with silvering hair, a deep scar running along his jawline, and a firm, steady stride. My father. He didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man who had walked through hell, survived the fire, and come back to claim what was right. He didn't look at Eleanor. He didn't look at the ruin of the dinner table or the police officers leading Julian away in chains. He walked straight to me, reached out his arms, and pulled me into a fierce, tight embrace. "I'm sorry it took so long, Evie," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with unexpressed tears. "I'm so sorry." "You came back," I sobbed, the last remnants of my strength finally breaking as I held on to his coat. "You came back for me." "I never left," he said, pulling back to look at my face. "I was always right there on the ridge." He turned and looked down at Eleanor Blackwood. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't show anger or vengeance. He simply pulled a single brass key from his pocket, the third key, the master key to the Blackwood family vault, and set it on the table in front of her. "Your father spent his whole life building a legacy out of fear and control, and it took one evening for it to turn to dust. You asked Evelyn to sit at the kids' table tonight because you thought she had no power, but the truth is, you were the one who never earned a seat at a real table." My father took my arm, turned his back on Eleanor Blackwood, and walked with me out of the mansion into the crisp, clear night air. Behind us, the sirens of the federal vehicles began to wail, cutting through the silence of the Oak Ridge estate. As we reached the edge of the driveway, Marcus was waiting by a dark SUV, holding the passenger door open for us. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the night sky clear, starry, and vast above the Virginia hills. I looked back one last time at the grand, lit windows of Blackwood Manor. The lights inside were flickering as federal agents began securing the estate. The dynasty was over, the lies were exposed, and the justice wasn't handed down by a miracle or a coincidence. It was built piece by piece, choice by choice, by people who refused to let the truth be buried. When people try to push you into a corner, strip away your dignity, and tell you where you belong, remember this. Lower minds always try to diminish you because your presence threatens their fragile illusions. You don't need their permission, their approval, or their seat at the table. When you stand firmly in your truth, discipline, and self-worth, you don't just take back your place, you build a foundation that no lie can ever tear down.